Hello, hello, everyone. It is a beautiful sunny morning here in Texas. And it's Friday, right? So we can't not be excited about that. Friday is a great day of the week. You get a little bit of work time, you get a little weekend time. I'm super pumped to chat with you today. I'd actually just love to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself, and then we can dive into the conversation.
Yeah, hi Tessa. Thanks for having me. My name is Bas. Actually, it's I'm a bit closer to the weekend than you are because we are in Europe here, and it's actually a lovely sunny afternoon. I'm a software
Woohoo.
engineer working at a biotech company, and we are like producing devices for biotech labs. Mostly, we do cell counting and cell analysis, and my role in particular is like to connect the people with the domain knowledge, that's biologists and physicists, with the actual software engineers somehow. So that's what I do.
I love that. That's very similar to developer relations, right? Where we're trying to connect the technical users to the internal team members to really advocate for their needs and wants. So,
Yeah, kind of, because a lot of things like revolve. So we are building a entirely new platform for all of our devices to run the same versions of the software, just
mm,
customized for the particular device. So a lot of like
sure.
requirements engineering and resources go into the direction of what do you really need? How do you really need to steer a
Mm,
device from, let's say, a physical point of view or a biologist's point of view?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, different, but it feels like sort of the essence is the same, right? You're
Yeah,
bridging that gap in between those different types of audiences.
absolutely.
Very cool. Yeah. Well, I want to dive into that a little bit more, but I'd love to hear about how you got there. So, what is your, career path? Is technology something you were interested in as a child? Like where did that
Yeah.
kind of originate and how did you get into this space now?
So actually, yeah, I was interested in technology as a child. I started programming maybe a couple of years after I started reading and writing. So in high school,
Amazing.
I had like my first, let's say, customer, my first client. I did, besides the school, I did a bit of PHP programming for them. And that worked out well,
Very
actually.
cool.
So after high school, I was tempted to take basically another year off to follow that path of having clients. Yeah, but then I was like, yeah, maybe for my career, it's better if there is a degree or something. So I ended up in
Hmm.
university, and there was a program that was called scientific programming back then, which is actually
Hmm.
the exact same thing that I'm doing right now. It's connecting basically Mint and domain
Ooh.
experts with modeling in computer science and yeah, that kind of things.
That is super
I,
cool.
I
That is
spent
not
I
something that
spent
I've
a
heard
lot of
about.
years like in doing different things, like primarily web development. So this actually is my first job where that education can shine really. But I
Oh
benefit a
my
lot
gosh,
of it.
wow. Right. Okay, so what did you do in between that, educational stage and to where you're at today? So you said web development. Did you have other roles that are sort of related? And then how did you end up getting to sort of land in that role that actually does associate to the degree at which you went after?
Yeah. So basically, I had consulting clients all the time in different shapes and
Mm,
sizes. There were e-commerce companies. There
good for
were
you.
like financial companies, tax consultancies, um, even a sports betting company from Brazil. Um, so
Ooh.
um, at some point, a recruiter reached out to me and said, "Okay, we have a new project. There's some biotech companies seeking help in some particular things." And I was like, "Okay, cool. How long will it take?" And they were like, "Okay, maybe 6 months." I was like, "Okay, let's take that." And it turned out, I mean, obviously, that was that company that I'm with right now for like 5 years. turns out they had a couple of more problems that fit into that then would fit into 6 months. So yeah, um, after the second extension of the contract, I decided to become permanent with them.
Oh, that's amazing. So a 6-month contract turned into now a 5-year tenure. Is that
No,
correct?
5 year, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Wow. That is so cool. I feel like that's, with so many people who are looking for work right now and just the like workforce ecosystem as it is, right? That's just such a beautiful thing to kind of have the opportunity to work with someone sort of on that contractual or like smaller basis, right? And then find, wow, there's actually a really
yeah.
great
I
fit for
mean,
me here
I'm more than
longer term.
happy to be with them permanent right now, because I mean, I was used to recruiters calling every other week or something like that. That was before the pandemic,
Mm,
and then
yeah.
all of the sudden everything died out, and now I also lost a bit of touch to the job market. I'm sometimes I
Mm,
really cannot make sense of all the things that are happening. But what I see there was like the
same.
COVID overshooting, and yeah, there are still enough things happening in the world today that might contribute to economical uncertainty. So I'm not really sure what to make out of that. All I can say, I'm more than happy to be with them, because like they are in an economic position that's very stable right now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like it's also really an interesting industry too,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
I get to talk to a lot of different developers that are in yeah, they're in different spaces and I think it's always interesting to talk to software engineers or anyone who gets to also play a part with hardware because that has been my entire life that has been something I absolutely love is to just take things apart physically and put them back together. And once I started doing software, I kind of stopped messing around with hardware. And I had a client last year that we were sort of going through their very early stage and we were just going through like what does it look like, what is their use cases, where can they shine brightest, and we learned that like ML ops was a great opportunity, which is beautiful obviously in the software side, but then robotics was also a really
Yeah,
beautiful opportunity for them because focus is reproducibility, right? So being hardware and making sure that it's exactly what it's supposed to be when it's actually deployed. Anyways, and so when they started looking at robotic stuff,
yeah,
I'm like, oh, this is cool. Like if I stay with y'all for a while, like I'd love to play with this. And so, anyways, I think
yeah,
it's kind of fun that like we get pulled down that path, right? And then it's like, wow, there's all this other tech that we don't necessarily think about that still leverages those same
yeah,
skills.
absolutely. And it's not only the diversity of the technology; it's also like, I mean, that company has a clear purpose, right? Their recruiting department, they
Yes.
have the claim of your talent can make cancer history. So there is like also like
Oh.
a little bit of value, but also a little bit of pressure to the work, if that makes sense. But that helps
Mm. Yeah.
getting around the daily annoyances that everyone has in some particular fields. But just to reiterate and say, okay, we are doing that here for a good reason. That's also something that helps.
I fully agree. There's also like some purpose behind that,
Yeah,
right? So I think sometimes we can be pulled into jobs that are a little bit more difficult or fast paced or maybe, dip into our work life balance. But when it's something that's so wholesome and I shouldn't say it's always wholesome, right? There's a lot of
yeah,
unwholesomeness in, medicine and health in general. But you're ideally contributing to answers, right? You're contributing to work that's hopefully going to give somebody answers or peace or
yeah.
resolution to something that is
And
unsolved.
even if it's just, I mean, for everyone in such companies, it's always just a very small piece of the entire puzzle. So it's a little bit easy to
Right.
forget that this bigger picture exists. Um, and then it helps to just remember that.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I mean, and then too, just thinking about like, wow, software really is everywhere. And I think once you sort of spend some time in the big tech space, then it's hard to, and I don't know why, because it shouldn't be, but I feel like it's hard to see outside of SaaS and software products, right?
Absolutely.
When it's like, no, there's actually all this other stuff outside of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
this whole echo
This is
camber revolving about JavaScript and all that kind of stuff, and now it's AI. Before it was blockchain, and yeah, but
yes.
I get you. That's we often forget that software is even in your toaster, right?
It is. It is. We learned that a few years ago with the what was it? Oh my gosh. It was like the Apache breach. I don't remember what it was, but long story
Yeah,
short, it was a while ago. Um, software breach that affects your toaster. Okay, so coming back around, I would like love to hear more about your sort of day-to-day job. So when we were on the pre-show, we were chatting just a little bit about what you do. And you had said something, that bridging that gap, right, of actually talking to those practitioners that are in the space and then helping get them, enabled to be able to do the things that they need to do. And so I had commented about I really enjoy talking to other developers because like we get each other, right? Like technically our brains sort of operate the same way. There's an intelligence level to most engineers,
mhm.
right, around how we problem solve. So I really enjoy talking to those people. And I am just super intrigued by your role because I think it would be really interesting to talk to people who are in a similar space, right? Great problem solvers, really technically or really intelligent, but just not necessarily on that technical side. So, what is it like engaging with some of those types of people? Is that fun? Is it challenging? What does that
Yeah,
kind of look
it's
like?
it's a fun challenge actually. um, like
Love
to
it.
give you
Love
an
it.
example, like one of our main product lines, they do magnetic cell separation. So what that means is you take a blood
Oh,
sample, for example, and you're interested in getting all your immune cells out of that sample, and the other cells, you don't
mm,
care about them because you want to do something else with those immune cells. So what you do is you
sure.
actually attach what we call biological software to the sample, which is like an
Mm,
antigen that connects to a specific antibody. And that antigen has one iron particle at the other side. And then you channel the whole sample through a very thin, like cannula, with a electromagnet on both sides. So what happens is those
ooh,
antigens that connected to the antibodies of the cells that you're interested in, they stay at the magnet, and the rest goes through. So um,
oh, very
that's
cool.
the high level explanation of it. But obviously, there is like a lot of technology, like layers in between. So there
Mm-hmm.
is like, how do we even create those antibodies? How do we make them stick to iron particles? How do we make sure that the magnet is strong enough to hold the stuff that we are interested about,
Mm,
and not collude with other particles that we are not interested in? So and
right.
so there is like probably a whole bunch of stuff done on the material science side of things, right? It's just creating those antigens, those iron particles, and stuff like that. And then all of that
Hmm.
needs to be processed in a machine, and that machine needs to be steered. So there is like, in a traditional app, you would have an UI. We have that as well because there's a worker in the lab who just clicks his experiments or her experiment, and then everything goes. Um, During the processing, it's more
Mm-hmm.
like robotics. We need to um, put on some diluters, set some valves, detect some bubbles in some tubes, and stuff like that. So
Mm-hmm.
there are hardly a couple of persons in the entire company that understand the whole process fully. So I'm talking to always to
Yeah.
people that only understands a very different part of the entire process. And
Mm,
well, then the biologists or physicists who design the process, how it happens on the machine, they are not aware of any like issues in software engineering or software architecture. They just want to say, okay, I need to move that diluter, I need to change that valve, or I need to wait for a bubble to pop up here. And at that point, like
Yeah.
if you need to wait for a bubble, for example, you are deep in asynchronous programming, which is something they just don't care about. But obviously, our software architectures
Hmm.
do a lot. And like bridging that gap involves basically understanding two kinds of languages, one from the domain experts and the other one from the engineering or from the software experts, right?
Hmm. Wow. Yeah, that I mean that's my brain is like
Yeah,
that is like so interesting.
it's a lot to process. That's not the only thing we do. I will spare you the details of the other things, but yeah, it can become a very complicated process. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you're engaging with, maybe like the bio, the scientific, staff members that are not familiar with software, what are some of those like tendencies, right? And like when we're working with different types of like scrum masters or product managers, right? Sometimes there's some stress and some pressure. So where does that tend to like come out from them? Is that like they expect sort of results or they are looking for something specific? Like you said, they don't understand the software. So what ends up being some of those like points of contention, I guess?
I think the main issues are like yeah, as I said, they just want to do some interaction with the machine. And the software
Mm,
architects, they want to have, okay, we need to make sure that if I have like a procedure that is called, okay, transfer liquid A to position B, that this runs across all machines that we have in the same way. So there's a lot of interface design that needs to be done. Whereas the biologists,
right.
they work in a different way. They just, I mean, for stuff before there even is a machine, they're just doing pipetting by hand, right? So they are used to a very
Mm-hmm.
much more experimental workflow, so to say. So they're not they're
Mm,
usually not inclined to formalize their workflow or their experiments in a way that they also have in mind, like all the other devices with their technical intricacies, all at the same time. So on the other
mm,
hand, the software engineers, they don't know about the technical intricacies of like those processes and how they happen on the biological side of things. So this is very
right.
complicated to actually find a good interface that eventually both parties will understand.
Mm,
So
that
and
makes
then
sense. So is there time?
then you end up with a lot
Yeah,
of
go
glue
ahead.
code actually. Like in every software project, we have like a framework to steer devices, and then you have a lot of glue code, and nobody understands why that glue code is actually necessary because they just I just want to change a valve.
Mm,
So why do I need all of that? Um, so um, I mean that's the other part of the picture to make it look like it is the simplest thing to do actually in software. The source code, our goal is to make
yep.
the source code or the usage of the framework as simple as it can be, right? And that's always, I
Sure.
mean, reaching simplicity is probably always the hardest thing to do.
I feel like that's kind of like developer A number one, probably biggest challenge, right? Is like in general to be able to do that, especially sometimes when things change, right? When we're ever flowing and altering things, it's hard to make sure that what you're building is continuing to follow that
Yeah,
same practice.
absolutely. And I mean, there's not only the
Mm,
software architecture part because our software needs to run on like 4 different platforms: Windows, Linux, Mac OS, and iOS.
mm,
Um, and
yeah,
so, well, setting up all those environments to work correctly, the CI/CD pipelines to work correctly, the testing, it just takes time. And if you're not like a software engineer in and of itself, you won't understand why all of that is necessary. And like every day, some new features
Right.
are added, and so are dependencies. So we spend a lot of time like just wrangling about them.
Hmm. Interesting. Okay, that's cool. Well, what is the so it sounds like you're working for like local applications, right, that are on computers, which I'm sure they're connected via networks and things. But what is your like your tool stack look like? Like what languages are you building in? What other types of yeah, what does that general stack look like,
So
I
the
guess?
general stack is like C++ in that case. Um, so we
Mm.
used
Yep. Yep.
to do a lot of experimental code with Python, which was easier for the biologists
Mm.
and physicists on the team. But now we decided to put the entire thing on C++ and make that work for everyone so that we don't do prototyping in a different language. So that was the main idea behind that.
Yeah,
So to make that all work, I mean,
that makes
parts
sense.
of the software are running on your iPad because you should be able to design your experiment in the lab the day before on your couch, right? So you design it on the iPad, connect your iPad to
Mm.
the machine, and then the next day it runs. It needs to run on Windows because you should be
Ooh,
able to
okay.
do that on your Windows machine as well. And it needs to run on Linux because that's
Sure.
what the embedded systems are running on. Um, so yeah,
Mm.
um, so the entire stack is a lot of testing frameworks for C++. We use the Google Test Suite for that, and a lot of automation. So we use classical Jenkins jobs, spin up a lot of Kubernetes instances and containers to do all of the automation part behind it. Yeah. So, but it's basically very
Yeah.
old school C++. plus plus.
Oh, that reminds me of General Mills. That's what I joined at General Mills. This has been a number of years ago. It was actually my last engineering role. I had joined at General Mills and I was tasked with the open source projects. But they're like, hey, we have some other projects we need you to work on. And they were in C, which was like not a language that was native to me. So it was interesting diving in, but also similarly in utilizing Jenkins as
Yeah.
well. So I really enjoyed it though, because it pushed me to learn more of that like enterprise based stack, which I think is just a really valuable tool set to have as a software engineer
I
for sure.
think like learning different languages or programming languages in general is a good thing to do because each language just teaches you some new way of looking at problems, some new way of thinking, and comes up with an entire different set of
I agree.
solutions. So, I mean, if you're just
Yep.
switching between C and C++, that won't make so much of a difference. But if you're switching between, I don't know, Python, Lisp, PHP, and TypeScript, or even Rust and Go or something of that kind, that I mean, that broadens your experience and the way to look at things a lot, I guess.
Fully agree. I absolutely agree with that statement because I was what I would call like a PHP dev, I
Yeah, I
guess, at that
started
point,
this way as
because I was
well.
working
Yeah,
on open source PHP like WordPress and
yeah.
stuff. Yep, yeah, and then shifting over, it very much was different, but real I really did enjoy it quite a bit. So that is super cool. Oh, I feel like I could ask you like a million questions about your job because it's like so intriguing to me to like be working in sort of this like scientific space, right? I feel like engineering in general is just um it's its own level of science, right? Its own level of like problem solving. But when you bring that into like a truly scientific environment, it's just my brain is like so intrigued
Yeah,
by it.
absolutely. Totally get it.
Okay, so yeah, yeah, that would be super fun. So anyways, okay, so outside of like let's say maybe your day-to-day job, is there any side projects you're working on? Are there any sort of interesting things that you play around on? What does like your outside of work time look like?
So yeah, actually there is. I'm taking some of the experience that I make with setting up all those development environments at work, and try to automate them.
Yeah.
So my current side project is
Ooh.
just revolving around that, like setting up development environments, sharing configuration in teams, all that kind of stuff. Um, yeah, there's nothing to show right now because there's not yet something published. But that's something I really enjoy doing. And there's so much like little tools out there that helps you a little, but there's no like
Yep.
overarching tool that you would just click a button and you're ready to go. That's just not existing. So what enterprises do, or
Yeah.
what they employ, is something called like a internal development platform or something. So you can just click whatever they
Mhm.
stack they have. You click new app, and then you're ready to go, right? So, but that's
Yeah.
an entire different story because I mean, it usually requires a team, an entire team, to just handle an internal
Mhm.
development platform. So that's a huge kind of investment to make. And my idea
Yeah.
is there something that we can simplify it in a way that you
Mhm.
as a developer can have an internal development platform by your own in just a matter of minutes.
Yeah. Ooh. That would be super
Yeah, it
powerful.
would. So that's a lot of ideas that go into it. Um, I think I rewrote the tool now for the third time or something, um, because like connecting those ends is the hardest part here, and to make sure all of that fits together
Mhm.
in a way that is actually helpful and not introducing another level of abstraction that tears you away from the problem that you're going to solve. So there's a lot of like
Yeah.
iterations to be done, but that's what I primarily work on in my spare time.
That is super interesting. Well, I think that there's obviously like a lot of different type of products and solutions out there to try to do this because it is such a massive pain point for so many,
Yeah,
software
absolutely.
engineers. But it's interesting because yeah, like unless you're actually in that situation, you don't necessarily know what engineers need, right? As we were just talking about, you need a completely different solution if you're building out a React site in TypeScript and using front end languages versus building biotechnology in C sharp and an enterprise, very compliant, I assume, driven capacity. So they just become completely different problems to
Absolutely.
solve. As you've been starting to work through as you've been starting to work through that, like, are do you have a focus of sort of where you're trying to bring that in, or are you really truly trying to think about that agnostic view of like everyone has the same fundamental needs, but maybe they have different ways that they need to get them?
Yeah, I think the main idea here is not to focus on the one tool that solves everything, but to drill it down into
Sure.
different, let's say, use cases. So just recently, I found
Mm,
someone on GitHub who built a tool like that's called Stelvio. And what that tool does is
okay.
it's a Python tool that allows you to create like serverless applications on AWS with Pulumi in the background.
Mm,
And what they do is actually um, trying to
interesting.
set up like the dependencies, the between different services in an easy way, and to make
Sure.
use of like higher level abstractions to the cloud primitives that the providers give us. Because like just
Yep.
adding a lambda function won't do the trick. You would need an API gateway, you would need this and that, and you need a configuration store and all that kind of stuff. So basically, you end up for a single application with probably like 50 cloud primitive resources, right? Um, but in the end, you would just want one
Yeah.
abstracted. So that wouldn't help much So basically, what they do, Stelvio, that's the name of the project that's already live. I also did a stream with the developer there. So that's one way to look at
Very
one
cool.
particular side of the problem. That won't help you very much in doing like embedded software for lab devices, right? And then there's other tools
Yep.
like, for example, the dev containers that are integrated in VS Code. I think nowadays they're also integrated in
Mm-hmm.
IntelliJ. So they allow you to set up a completely isolated environment, like within a container. Probably
Mm-hmm.
that again won't help you
Yep.
very much if you're doing cross-platform development. Like you can run a container, but
Right.
how would you test a Windows application or an iOS application for that matter?
Mm-hmm.
So I think the solution to
Right.
all of this is not to do, okay, here's a development tool that every developer can use, but to drill it a bit down deeper to the use cases that developers actually face, and
Mm-hmm.
then do the simplification here.
Mm. Well, that's super interesting because obviously I mean, you can have an extensive amount of use
Yeah,
cases. So that is something there's a whole nother, situation to dive into. But it sounds like you're sort of instilling that down to its at least its most simplest form when
yeah.
possible to be able to
I mean,
address.
the idea here is to like it's a slippery slope, so to say, like, because we are just adding with those tools, we are adding another layer of abstraction of layers of abstraction,
True.
and that stacks up as well, and that comes with its own problems. But I think we are just in a state as an industry where we don't have so much tools that actually connect all those ends. So
Mm-hmm.
I think, long story short, I think there is still room for one other layer of abstraction, but don't quote me on that because that could be famous last words, right?
That's true. That is absolutely true. Oh, I feel like that's just normal though, right? Of like, there's always something of like, we think that we have solved a problem, but then things get more complicated. And then we're back of like, oh, 2 years ago, I thought that was the solution. But it turns out now things have become even more complicated. And now that is not the solution. It's like software engineers' last words,
Absolutely. I
right?
mean, if you look at it, you come from a PHP background as well. Like when I started, there was no Git. There were just like text editors
Yep.
and FTP
Same.
servers,
SVN.
right? And so we just
Yes.
uploaded
Yep.
component.php to some strange directory, and it worked, right? So and then
Yep.
like this was, I mean, that's also the reason why MySQL at that time got that much popularity because it just worked. Then we introduced
It
containers,
was easy.
microservices, and all that kind of stuff, just to come back to serverless, which is basically the same as uploading a PHP file. It's in TypeScript, and there's a kind of a command line wrap around it. But basically, it's the same idea. Like because you don't want to care about availability zones, you don't want to care about replications and all that kind of stuff. Um, you just want, okay, I have code here, I want it to run for the internet. That's it. So we've come basically the whole circle. So, and now, in between, unfortunately, software has become so much more complex and bigger team sizes are involved. That easy part of even serverless replicating the means of a PHP file now boils down to 500 primitives that eventually no one understands.
Oh, I agree so much with that. I'm like, you just like hit me right in my soul. Arvind asked if well, specifically addressed at me if I like jQuery along with PHP. Like, you have to when you
Yeah.
came from those days, and I don't know about you, but like you just have to because like that is what was the beautiful JavaScript solution we had at that time. So I absolutely loved jQuery because it was our framework that made JavaScript a lot easier to
Do you
implement.
remember the
But again, when I think about that,
do you remember the
you go ahead.
jQuery data tables plugin? Yeah,
Yes.
that was my
Yes.
favorite.
Oh man. Oh, the good old days. It's funny because like I've been in DevRel for so long that like so my last role, that being the one at General Mills, right, really got to sort of like push and get a little bit beyond PHP. But then now I've been in DevRel, and so which I still get to play with technology, but it's just not at the same vein, right? I'm not building full software solutions to be ingrained in all the microsystems and all the containerization and all the different ways that software is created and deployed today. um, but I think that it's interesting. Gosh, where was I going with that? I had a point to what I was saying, and my brain was like, "Nope, let's just let the point go." Either way, I have a lot of imposter syndrome. Is likely where we were coming back to. Is that if I wanted to, as I'm like thinking about going back to the workforce, I'm like, maybe I should go back to being an actual engineer. And I'm like, oh my gosh, the amount that I'd have to like catch up on is wild because so much has changed. But then it's also sort of this like glimmer of hope of like realizing that software is a bit more complicated than it might need to be in
Yeah,
some use cases, right? Biotechnology aside, obviously that's more complicated. But when we're talking about a traditional web app or a traditional SaaS platform or a traditional software product, right? Some of those complexities are not as necessary. And so I don't know. I guess all that to say is that I think we're just going to continue to sort of ebb and flow, similar to what we talked about in the pre show about remote
yeah,
work and the ebb and flow of being remote, being fully remote, being forced back into the office. And it's just been interesting to sort of watch the whole evolution,
yeah.
I guess.
And I think a lot of those solutions are just like created by very large tech enterprises. So everyone is using React. React is solving problems at a Facebook scale. Everyone is using Kubernetes. Kubernetes is solving problems at a Google scale. So, I mean, they did a lot,
Right.
both of those projects did a good job in actually reducing the complexity. But still, they are just like monsters.
Sure. Yep. Yes, exactly. And I think that plays into it too of like, I don't know about you, and maybe this is a whole conversation that will take too long for us to do on this show, but I feel like in technology, and actually, let me take a step back. For those of us that fall into this bucket who enjoy technology, who really nerd out on different things, we may not have been the most popular kids in school. I'm not saying that that's always the case. That's a stereotype, right? I moved to a small town, and then wouldn't you know it, I got to do all the sports that I ever wanted to do because there was 100 of us, and so opportunities, right? But previous to that, I was definitely one of the like nerds that just wanted to be playing with hardware or learning something new. And then we get into our careers, right? And there's that sort of funny saying of like, you're the nerd today, but you're going to be the leaders of tomorrow, right? Because of what we dive into. Anyways, where I'm getting to is that once we get into this sort of technology space, I still feel like there's a whole bunch of clicks. And I feel like these clicks are now related around these big, giant enterprise
Yeah,
companies. Oh my gosh, you work at Google and you're doing this. Oh my gosh, you work at blah, 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 and you're doing this. Of course, it's cool. They're solving really cool challenges. But I also feel like there's a bit of trend setting that is
yeah,
happening with it. And I'm like, I thought we wanted to get out of that space, right? Like, and so, anyways, I'm curious how you feel about that sentiment because I also feel that same way about some of the influencers and some of the developers that are more known. And it's super cool to know your friends and it's great to talk with other people. But I think at the same time, I'm like, we're just creating what we already had
yeah,
and didn't
absolutely.
like,
I
you
mean,
know?
that's the entire point. I feel exactly the same, right? Not that these are bad tools, not that they are not interesting, not that they are not like
Right.
well engineered or something.
Exactly.
They are just trying to do everything right at a scale that you probably won't ever achieve, right? You're probably not operating an entire search
Agreed.
engine. You're not operating ChatGPT on a global level. with millions and millions of servers. You just want a sortable data table, so you might be good with jQuery. So you might not have thousands of developers on your team that all needs to share the same interfaces, uh, development environments, working culture, and whatnot. You might end up with one or two co-workers hacking together a cool app. So probably won't need all of that. Not that that's bad, but it is designed and engineered for problems most of us don't have.
But staged to be super cool, so we
Yeah,
should all use
absolutely.
them.
I mean, they set the pace. They are not only releasing those cool tools as open source, they're also like involved in creating the standards around it. Like, I mean, the main contributors to
Right.
the World Wide Web Consortium is Apple, Google, Facebook, and all the others, right? I mean, Google
Yep.
just introduced a network
Like,
protocol. Like they pushed HTTP2, they pushed Quick as kind of a successor for TCP/IP. Um, you just wouldn't have cared for all of that low-level stuff if you weren't the size of Google, right?
right. It also sort of makes you wonder, or at least it makes me wonder, if that's actually how we want to see technology in the future, right? Like someone made a post yesterday, and this is a bit controversial, but I think it's sort of on topic. That this person decided that they were leaving technology because they don't agree with some of the things that these big companies are
Mm.
choosing to do, from capitalism to racial abuse to et cetera, right? And it really got me thinking, because I'm like, gosh, like we really truly do have these kind of high pillars in the technology space that people sort of, not everyone, of course, this is not always true, but that some engineers sought after, right? To be able to work at Google, to be able to work at Microsoft, to be able to work at Apple, or even just having that on your resume is something that's has some clout behind it, right? But then when you think about it, how beautiful, or how lack of beauty, the lack of beautifulness, that these big companies have so much pull and so much control, that when you start to think about, like, so I had a one client who was doing something super cool, very similar to a Google Docs, being able to edit in sync, right? A very hard problem to solve. They had created a patent, and then they actually got, Google was coming after them for what they were doing, and they're like, hey, we already have a patent here. Small company,
Yeah,
right? Small couple developers trying to solve something that's super cool. But because of the big foundation and all the money and all the backing, it's like they can go after these two developers that are just trying to do something really super cool. And I think that it long story short, it just really has me questioning all the things of like, okay, where should we really be investing our power and our skills? And like, should we try to be investing more in things that are not controlled by all these big
I
companies?
mean, they're just again, they're just solving their problems, and so at that scale, they're
Right.
cutting edge technology, right? That's the same thing. If you're a mechanical
Yeah.
engineer and your dream job is to end up at NASA, right? You're building space rockets now. Ooh. Does it help to build you the bridge in your local community? I don't know. But you can fly to the moon. You can technically do that. But for like building a smaller combustion engine, you probably need a different set of tools. Not ju- it's not that
Right.
just because Google and Facebook happens to live on the internet that we all need to do it the way they do.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think that is the essence of what I think is sort of key for going into the future, especially with AI, right?
Yeah.
With these AI builders that sort of dictate what languages and what stack are being created in, and sometimes just deploy them for you, which is beautiful and really helpful. But I do think that it is I don't know. I guess for me, I'm like, it's sort of time to like question things and decide, like, what do I
Uh,
really truly want to be working on? What do I want to be building, and what do I want to be
I
contributing
mean,
to?
we talked about that pre-recording. Like a lot of things happen in cycles, right? And there's like nowadays also a
Hmm.
movement on back to self-hosted. There are those tools like Coolify,
Yes.
Kamal, and DHH posting about Twitter. I mean, last week the outage of Cloudflare that took down the entire internet for an hour?
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean that was his lucky hour, right? The entire person
Yep.
became unbearable for the next 24 hours just because he tweeted so much of "I told you so." Yeah. And
It was his
that
moment,
was his
though.
moment. Yeah, I mean that happens once a year, but there's some truth to this, right? Why
Yep.
not just spin up a good old dedicated server, run your own things? You can still use containers. I mean, it's not that we don't take the good parts. It's just that we get rid of the like
Yep.
unused parts that we don't need at the scale that we are at right now.
Yep. Oh, that's so true. And I think because of my like engineering origination days, what we were just chatting about earlier, right? That is more of like my, of course, like it's going to be my focus and my directional go-to because I am not a part of one of those giant enterprise companies that does have microservices and massive Kubernetes instances and they're on cloud servers. And I was actually talking to my friend who's an engineer and we were talking about the product that I'm building and he's like, "Well, you're going to need it on a cloud service." And I was like, "Why?" He's like, you're going to have to." He's like, "You need Kubernetes." I was like, "But why?" And he's like, "Because you just need it." And I was like, "But I don't. Like I don't have and won't have the user base that would require that for like many, 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 many months or years. And even if that ends up being the case, right, we can adjust, but it's absolutely not where I want to start." And then coincidentally ended up getting a client that's very like local first edge, on the actual like device type of infrastructure. And I was like, oh yeah, this just like tickles my nerd bone to just be able to think about those
I
things.
mean,
So
I think it doesn't matter if you're a mechanical engineer or a software engineer. As an engineer, you always want to find a good solution. It just happens to be that on the internet and in the software world, you don't need to buy tons of raw material to build a rocket engine. It's just free. It's free to over engineer. It just takes your time. So the tendency of doing that is always
mm,
tempting. But yeah, it's also easy to forget that time is actually a very valuable thing, and that you should not waste time in optimizations you don't need. But over engineering in general is like
right.
for every engineer, they want to do it right, and rightfully so. There's just in
Yes.
software no limit. Whereas, like whenever you do with mechanical engineering, you would need to acquire hardware that would cost you millions. If you do everything right, then you would have like a hammer and a screwdriver that cost you a million. But it's right, and nobody will do that. If it's just time, it's always tempting.
Yes. Yes. I think too, sometimes we can get pulled into like the tempting side of over engineering something because it's a
Yeah,
fun
absolutely,
challenge. Maybe it's something we hadn't done yet, or it's something we've gotten to do once and we're like, we want to play
absolutely,
again. Yeah. Oh, this has been a very, very fun
absolutely
conversation.
loved it.
So you mentioned a yeah, good, good. You mentioned a live stream that you had a conversation on. Where is that live stream at, or where can that be found? Is that on YouTube,
So
or
it's
where can I point people to go
Yeah,
find the live stream that you
absolutely. You
referenced?
can just go to my Twitter account, which is Bas Codes. I publish them there. I also put them on YouTube, which is also Bas Codes. Yeah, I'm just starting to do that,
Perfect.
and I'm also trying to have those kind of fun conversations with people to just get different perspective on things. I think that's the most important thing to do, whether it's with people or with programming language. Um, yeah. So yeah, go check it out.
Great. I love that. Those happen to also be, like you said, your social channels. So anyone that wants to go find them, it's BAS and then code, so CODES. Pretty easy to go track down, honestly, which is great. Um, this has been absolutely lovely. Is there anything else that you'd love to share or, tell the
I,
listeners? Yeah, anything before we
I
wrap up,
just
I
want
guess.
to thank you for your time because it was a fun conversation for me as well. And I
Mm.
think we covered a lot. So that was fun. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Well, thank you for coming on the show. Like, I love having these conversations. And the whole point of me starting the show originally was I'm like, okay, I need to get caught up on all the things in technology. What are people
Yeah,
doing? What are the trends? What are they building? What are they building with? And this conversation just totally just filled my heart with all of that because we got to talk about so many different things. So this was absolutely lovely.
absolutely.
All right. Well, until next time, thank you.